a lot of research
from it, and they suffer because they're not really tuned into anything. And when you're not tuned into anything, you're going to get disconnected and go into very, very limited spaces in consciousness. But when you synchronize with fields of frequencies that exist naturally, you start to have experiences. Dante, the great Italian poet and mystic, described in his journeys in the Divine Comedy to all of the planets up to Saturn, Jupiter and Saturn, going from Venus, and he goes to Venus and he sees all these beautiful women, and they're all, naked, and they're all, and men, and there's this kind of erotic love happening on the sphere of Venus, on the astral plane, not on the physical plane, but on the astral plane. And then Emanuel Swedenborg, who also describes going to Venus, the third, what he describes as that sphere of consciousness, experiences exactly the same thing. But when Dante goes to some of the higher planets, he starts to see more and more luminous, more and more higher conscious humans that have, transgressed and have died and moved on. So he's seeing a solar system full of beings living on the different planets. And so what I did is, this is like stage one, is using artificial transmission of frequencies using my technology, my lightstreamtechnologies.com wand. And I pulsed my body, and I'm a very experienced meditator. I've been doing this for 33 years every day with the frequencies.
Is this how you see, like, neighbors coming through the walls? Because I was going to ask you.
So that,
how are you able?
Let's go back, because all that happened when suddenly, in about 1994, a couple of my companies went bankrupt trying to raise money for nuclear fusion and alternative energy research. And every year I would go to Canada and plant trees for a living, which was just barely enough money to survive on for the rest of the year at a very, very low income rate. But I liked planting trees because it was part of my environmentalism. And that particular year, the Canadian government decided to fine me for back taxes of, I owed $1,000, and they took $10,000 out of my bank account, and I had nothing left to live on that year. So I pitched a tent on my father's horse ranch with his wife in Topanga, California, and I was living like that with no money. And my dad's house was being renovated, so there was nowhere for me in the house, and I was out pitching my tent next to the horses. And I had a BMW parked in the yard, the leftover remnants of the company, and having all these high-profile meetings with the richest people in my vicinity, whom none of them would fund anything towards these major technologies. Like, one of them was MIT physicists who had developed a way to produce non-radioactive nuclear fusion using helium-3 fuel, and helium-3 is found mostly abundantly in moon dust. So therefore you realize what a lot of the alien mining operations are doing on the moon. So, I spoke in Congress on that. We got turned down by the Al Gore administration. We had several Nobel Prize winners supporting the technology, but it didn't matter. Nobody wanted to fund it. So I went broke. A partner and I spent a lot of money promoting those different technologies, and Michael Jackson's company turned us down. The Resnicks, who own the Franklin Mint, who print all of our coins, they turned us down. Many people who claimed they were ecologists, environmental investors, they all turned us down. So,
wow, Michael Jackson. Yeah, I thought he was like the biggest humanitarian.
Yeah, and even Jane Fonda wrote me this nice rejection letter, who was a strong, anti-nuclear power advocate, but wouldn't get behind even promoting the funding with Ted Turner of non-radioactive helium-3 fusion, and we were supported by all these Nobel Prize winners that said it would work. And James, the head of NASA's Space and Technology Division, Earl Van Landingham, a brilliant propulsion scientist himself, wanted our technology to be privately funded because NASA wouldn't fund it for various reasons that would destroy the military-industrial complex regarding the building of nuclear weapons. You see, you can't you can't have a nuclear bomb unless you have a power plant, as in the case of Korea right now. You need a nuclear power plant to breed plutonium from uranium. Plutonium is not a natural element. It's a bred element. You've got to bombard uranium with neutrons until you get plutonium. And you need a power plant to do that. And the problem was, if we succeeded in building a meter-squared power plant that produced over 1 billion watts of power, which is what NASA said the power output would be with helium-3, which is found in moon dust, we would have all the power we need, and there's no radiation with helium-3.
Technology division.
So they didn't want to fund us because it would, the Department of Defense wouldn't have all these breeder reactors to get their tritium and their plutonium. So there was a huge conspiracy against us. But there was Jane Fonda, who was fully aware and wrote me this letter how she couldn't help me.
Himself
Sally Field
wanted our technology to be private.
So Hollywood was not willing to help. And we got some press, but it wasn't huge.
We funded because NASA wouldn't fund it.
And then when we went to speak in Congress in 1994 in April, this month, I spoke there with the actor from LA Law, Harry Hamill. He was supporting us and trying to get Al Gore to see the light of day that this technology would have changed the whole planet. You could put helium-3 fuel cells in your electric car, and you would recharge your car, once a year if you're lucky. You probably wouldn't even need to recharge it once a year. So military batteries would have been destroyed by the helium-3 little cells. Well, anyway, it all failed. And
I was gonna
there I am,
the building of nuclear weapons.
What's that?
You see, you can't.
Oh, I was gonna say I'd ask why we're not using that type of technology, but I think I already know the answer to that.
Well, it never got funded, and the researchers moved on to other technology and things that they could get funding for. And there are a lot of people who, even at major universities, who had the dream and the vision of getting helium-3 fusion funded, especially this particular approach by Bogdan Maglich, the chief scientist behind the invention. But it all failed, and now we have, the nuclear incident at Fukushima in Japan, which is still devastating our ecology and our children with radiation today.
Oh,
and so there I am, sitting there, lying in the dirt with the failure of this, and a rainstorm came one night and just flooded my tent, and I was getting hypothermic, and I left my body, and I thought I had died, actually, and I had floated above the rain clouds in California just before sunrise, and I thought, oh my God, you're dead, and you're above the clouds, like, is this over? And these little tiny balls of light, millions and millions of them, came from every direction in space, above, below, behind me, and they rushed together with this deafening sound, and they formed the body of Christ right in front of me, blazing like 1,000 of our suns. And I collapsed at his feet, couldn't stand up, and when I came near him, there was just so much love and ecstasy. I couldn't look. I look at his face and look at his feet, look at his face and look at his feet. And he started teaching me quantum physics, singularity, duality, polarity matrices, like, at the speed of light. This super communication was going on. And within days of my first meeting with him, I could see the dead. I could see ghosts as clear as a person sees a human being next to them, not closing my eyes and getting a mental image. In a full three-dimensional space, I was seeing spirits. And that ability... What's that?
I kind of have some questions about that. What kind of feeling did you get when you seen them? Did you feel like it was interdimensional, or did you feel like they were right there with you? I hear a lot of like religious fanatics, I like to call them, who will say if you're seeing these things that they're evil, and you should try to get as far away from it as you can. But did you get that feeling at all?
No. The beings, the people that I met after meeting Christ were, and firstly, in my opinion, I forgot to mention that when I floated out of body above the oak trees in my dad's yard, there was a giant crucifix, and the crucifix, beneath the crucifix was a baptismal font of water, which in the spirit I was baptized in front of before I actually met him. So that was the sign of the cross, to know that I'm not being deceived and this is really him. Then seeing the ghosts and the spirits I saw over the years, I mean, I saw Princess Diana the next day after she died, that late summer, is with the sun up, and I had built a large deck, and upon that deck I built a yurt, which is a really kind of modern tent, where I had my room. I had electricity in my bed and everything, and I was working for Department of Defense as a contractor by the same physicist while I was living like that. And I would drive to work in a BMW and come home and sleep in the yurt and have these continuing mystical experiences. My boss had no idea what was really going on with me. And that's when the universe opened up, and I met, a lot of different, deceased humans and some star beings from different parts of the universe. It started to happen. But after, many years of that and seeing my neighbors floating out of body, I was learning that I really didn't have any control of who I was going to meet and from what star system, and there was no focus. It was just kind of surprising me all the time. I mean, one night I woke up in the yurt, and that thing had 9-foot ceilings. I mean, taller than most people's, 9 or 10-foot ceilings, most people's houses. And I saw these 3 big balls of light about the size of basketballs, and one was kind of a bluish purple, and one was white, and one was kind of a, ruby color. And they were floating right in front of me, talking to me in English, telling me they were Arcturians. And I had never heard of an Arcturian. I had never heard of the star system Arcturus. I'm not really that up on astronomy, pretty basic astronomy. Most of the sciences that I studied in were more in the realm of consciousness and electromagnetism and harmonic fields and field effects and nuclear fusion and the nuclear sciences, so I wasn't really up on astronomy. I mean, science is very focused. Some people think because you're a scientist, you know everything about everything that's going on, and no, most scientists are very narrow, and they focus on one little sector, and they know a lot about that one little sector, but they don't know the whole picture. So I didn't know the name.
I was going to say the scientists, most of them can't really get the whole picture because there's a lot of them out there who will close their minds, and if they can't measure it, it don't exist. That kind
of.
And
there are better and better methods of measuring, but science is very limited in that if you can't measure it with a handheld device or some type of measuring tool, you're right, it doesn't exist. But measuring devices are getting better and better, and they are starting to see the power and the effects of other dimensions upon this dimension, impeding upon this dimension. And that's where my physical sciences started to go. Over the years, I meet these 3 balls of light. They say they're Arcturians, and it took me several months to find a book called We the Arcturians by Norma Milanovich, where she describes the same 3 colors that I saw, the fuchsia, the bluey purple, and the white. They said that's their 3 colors, and I said, well, that's the colors that what I saw. And when you're collecting data in science, if things are consistent, if your data is consistent, then it means that you've really stumbled upon something. Why would she get the same 3 colors that I did? I never heard of her. Well, when I saw them in front of my eyes and they told me that, I fell back asleep, left my body, and I saw the 3 balls of light go up into motherships the size of cities. I mean, enormous ships. But these ships were made of light. They were non-physical. You didn't see metal. Everything was glowing, and they were truly the size of cities. I mean, bigger than the city of Los Angeles, and there were several of them. Well, what's interesting about those little guys is they have been videotaped in crop circles, the little basketball-sized balls of light. They've been videotaped making a crop circle. They have been videotaped in broad daylight in the fields, and a lot of people in the crop circle movement have labeled them as Arcturians from the star Arcturus. So, years later, I'm doing astronomy, but my astronomy is very different than most people's astronomy. I'm looking for the frequency of that star system and that star. And if you know the radius And NASA uses this incredibly accurate system called parallax, where they can determine the radius of a lot of the stars in the local neighborhood that we live in. So tonight I sent you the frequency, the exact frequencies that I generated from a signal generator of Sirius A and Sirius B. And because they're so close to us, we're actually in their constellation. Sirius, Alpha Centauri, and our sun are all part of a constellation. We're very close together. And
I
there,
had
you know,
a
there is,
guest. I was going to say I had a guest on about a week ago. Well, Friday it was. Craig Campasso, I believe his last name.
Yeah, Craig
was.
Campasso. Yeah, I know Craig.
Yes, yeah, and he's presently making a movie, Visitor at the Pentagon, I think it's called. And I was looking at some of the material that he had, and I talked with him for a little while, and it appears that there's supposed to have been some real alien being that claims he was from Venus that was actually working somewhere in the Pentagon.
Right, the stranger at the Pentagon story. You see, this is an interesting story, Michael, because Nikola Tesla, who was the true father of radio, who demonstrated radio at the Chicago World's Fair in 1893, before his lab assistant Marconi, stole the technology and broadcast across the Atlantic. Tesla pointed his antennas at Venus, and he claimed, and there's a famous letter, you can Google and see this letter, that he was receiving a radio broadcast from Venus. And it was an intelligent signal, but in the early days, radio was not that clear. And he claims that it was an actual broadcast, not a random frequencies being generated by the planet itself. And when I started pulsing my body, and I would actually do it in our bedroom, and without even telling my wife what we were doing, we both woke up that morning and described meeting these highly beautiful, erotic, people. And they tried to seduce me, and it didn't work, but nevertheless, I experienced that. And that is consistent with what Dante and what Emanuel Swedenborg found there. So Valiant Thor and this beautiful blonde woman and another man are photographed in the story of that Craig Campobasso's new book is about, The Stranger at the Pentagon, and his new film. There is a book called Stranger at the Pentagon, and this is a book that's written by, I'm trying to remember his name because he was a former military officer who had meetings with Valiant Thor. And you look at them and you go, wow, these are really beautiful people. These are really good-looking people. What's interesting to me about the case is first, backing up, we have confirmation that the father of radio got intelligent signals from Venus, and two, nobody ever saw the picture of Valiant Thor, which you can look at online, and this beautiful blonde woman he's with who looks kind of like Marilyn Monroe. And nobody ever said, that's my friend so-and-so, and this is just a trick. He's all dressed up, and I know that guy. Not a single person on planet Earth since the 1950s when that happened ever said that. And there are clear pictures of Valiant Thor, very clear. He's in a suit, he's got this amazing hairdo, and the woman he's with, the same. Nobody ever did that. So that means, to me, you've had all this time to try to disprove the story, and no one could disprove it. The only thing NASA could say today is, well, the temperature on Venus is too hot, and therefore no one could survive down there. Well, let me tell you about what heat really is, so you really understand from a science perspective how a physical organism can survive in any temperature. Okay. Heat is a difference or a differential between the electromagnetic energy coming from the sun and how it vibrates against that atomic structure. Now, if the difference between a low-frequency organism and a high-frequency light wave is very high difference, you get a high temperature, and therefore the cellular structure and the crystalline structure cannot survive the temperature. But if you have a very low resistance in a biological life form, and that can be due to a lot of crystal, semiconductive material like silica in their organism, then they can withstand much higher temperatures and not actually feel heat the way we describe heat. So our cellular structure and biological structure and cell structure is designed in a way that it just has the right amount of resistance to warm us up to the temperature that we survive at on this planet. So you can have beings, physical beings, that vibrate at way higher frequencies than we do, that don't experience the temperature difference that you described. But because they are higher vibrational beings, you probably can't see them physically as easily as, for example, we can see each other. Now, what happened to my brain when I met Christ is he did something to me, because within days he changed the vibratory rate of my brain and my heart and my energy field, so I could see them as clear. When I see them, they're perfectly clear. I can pass my hand right through them because I've done that many times. But they're as solid and physical looking as a regular human being. They're not vaporous. They're not fuzzy. I can count the stitches on, Princess Diana's shirt. It's that clear when she's sitting in front of me. And
oh, wow.
So, in fact, when she was sitting there, she just kept saying, "I can't believe they killed me." And that's all she kept saying. She just looked at me, and I thought, what are you doing here with me? I'm living in a yurt. The poorest conditions that an American Canadian, I'm Canadian by birth, could be living in. I mean, this is bordering homeless. I'm living in a giant tent, and you're in my room. And I actually hid under the covers and said, I don't want to be responsible for this. No one's going to believe me if I say that I met you. And there was a reason why she chose to come to me.
I see. So if she's still there, is that to say that we don't come back, reincarnation, that type of thing?
Well, reincarnation is highly mysterious. There were early Christian documents that were destroyed by the church that pretty much prove that Jesus was teaching that we continue to reincarnate, not necessarily on this planet. Some of the planets we'll go to may be worse than this, and some a lot better, to continue to learn our lessons until we become light beings, until we become fully resurrected light beings, which is the real meaning of heaven. But not. It's not that we all have to come back here to this particular planet and this particular dimension of Earth. There are a lot of beings that have passed that don't reincarnate, according to even Buddhism. They may not reincarnate even in a physical body for 1,000 years before they reincarnate. So you don't necessarily come right back here.
Yeah,
but that was my experience. I mean, I've met
away from it all.
I've met hundreds of them, hundreds. But see, now what starts to happen is when I pulse my body with Jupiter, that night I clearly leave my body. I go to one of Jupiter's moons, and there are temples like the Greco-Roman temples that are enormous, much bigger in size than the ones that were on Earth. And there are these gods that look like superheroes, men and women with these platinum, purpley type of metal breastplates and armor, and they have face masks, and lightning is flashing between their chests, and they're a lot taller than I am. They're probably somewhere around 18 feet tall, and they look down at me, and I'm holding my transmitting wand in my hand, and they said, he will become as one of us, and that I need to build my transmitters on a larger scale, because they said that technology that you invented actually works, that by pulsing your DNA with the frequencies of distant planets allows you to astral project to that planet and have contact. Just because the speed of the human aura was measured by German scientists, a top German physicist named Fritz Albert Popp, and the speed of the light that comes off of our light bodies is faster than light, faster than cell phone. So therefore you can communicate with distant star systems instantly if you start to pulse that frequency into your body. So the movie Resonance Beings of Frequency proves that the DNA does transmit electromagnetic signals back and forth. It also proves that artificially inducing frequencies on the body is read by the DNA. What the movie doesn't know is that your DNA transmits faster than light, and you can actually open up a communication with other star systems. And this is what I did. This is what started to happen. And since our last show, things got really wild. My wife and I and our baby were living in a house in Sedona, and we were having regular visitations from Pleiades, from beings from the Pleiades, and it started to get physical, paranormal in the house.
Hold it right there, David. We've got to take a break. But
for those people who are Christian mystic, at least open to Christian mysticism, that there is a very profound connection to Jesus in the Pleiades that I personally discovered in the Great Pyramid, which has never been discovered before. And I'm going to lay that out in some background on the Pleiades before I tell people what was happening in our house that actually caused us to move out of the house because of some very extreme paranormal activity that the Pleiadians actually directed us to move out of this particular house. But firstly, the Jesus connection to the Pleiades, I've never said this on any radio show. It's going to be part of my new film on the Quantum Pyramid. When I was looking at the Great Pyramid as a crystal electronic oscillator, what is known in electronics as an oscillator, one of the primary components of tuning radio stations in a radio device and also in computers, you have crystal oscillators and transistors, which are all made of crystal, by the way, and layers of conductive or gold-like foil. So, and I talked about that on our last show, so if people want to know more about that, you have to go back. But the point is, once I realized the pyramid was an oscillator and I determined the frequencies of the Great Pyramid, and we transmitted them into the human body during meditation, just recently I had a very advanced aura photography done of 3 women in Sedona before and after being exposed to 45 minutes of the pyramid frequencies. And it was so mind-blowing when you saw this woman's aura before with a lot of breaks in the energy field around her spine, and her chakras were all disaligned. And after 45 minutes of the pyramid frequencies, her light body was so supercharged with light, some other competitive researchers became alarmed and said, that's too much light. That can't be good. And I kind of laughed, like, what do you mean that's too much light? That's what you want. You want to enlighten your transmitter so you can have cosmic experiences. And all of this woman's chakras became super aligned, and the energy coming out of her third eye and crown chakra, her cosmic consciousness centers, was huge. I mean, enormous. And I realized partially what the pyramid was really for was that anybody who sat inside of it could use it as a super crystal oscillator to activate consciousness so that you could communicate with gods and goddesses from other star systems. But then I found, oh my God, there is a remarkable, previously undiscovered connection to Jesus and the Pleiades star system sitting in here. And what it is, in Peter Ramizure's book, The Great Pyramid Decoded, which came out in the 70s, it was known that when you face north, the Great Pyramid was originally aligned to magnetic north, and now it's aligned to true north. At summer solstice, there's a shadow that is cast that runs right through the city of Bethlehem. And they call it the Bethlehem angle. It's 26.3 degrees coming out of the pyramid. And I said, well, wait a minute. There's got to be more to this Bethlehem angle, because the pyramid was built at least thousands of years before Jesus was ever born. So whoever built it, if there's a connection to Jesus in the pyramid, it's predicting his birth. The birth of Messiah would be in Bethlehem. But how could the builder have known that when this thing was built at least several thousand years before he was born? I think it's much older than that. But then I went, well, there's 363 degrees in a circle. Let's subtract 26.3 degrees from a first circle and see what the difference is. And the difference is 333.7. So you have the Trinity imprinted in the inverse of the Bethlehem angle. And I said, that is incredible. That's the most sacred number in stone Masonic wisdom. The 333 is the sacred number of angle. And then I said, well, where does the ascending-descending passage in the pyramid has the same angle, 26.3 degrees? What star system does it align to? And in Peter Lemizure's book, The Great Pyramid Decoded, in I think it's 4121 BC, at summer solstice, it aligns with the Pleiades star system. So you see the sacred angle pointing to the Pleiades star system in summer solstice, 2141 BC, and you tilt that angle on the ground coming out of the north angle, and it goes right through the city where Jesus is born. And so what I believe the Star of Bethlehem really was the Stargate actually was vibrating and opening between Earth and that star system that was going to send the birth of Christ through the Stargate portal, and he would be born. And that's what the three wise men and the real meaning of the Trinity was. It was a vibrational Trinity, the actual vibration of the inverse of the angle. So that 26.3 degree angle points to the Alcyon, the central star in Pleiades, and then it goes right through the city of Bethlehem when you lay it down on the angle on the ground. So that's the connection to Christ in the pyramid, although it's much, much deeper than that in my movie. Then you go to the oldest spiritual literature that has survived from the last great flood, or the great pole shift that happened some 10,000 years ago. You have what's known as the Rig Veda in India, their oldest, most sacred manuscript. And if you read the first pages of Rig Veda, it looks like you're reading the book of Genesis in the Bible. And Rig Veda points to a personality, a god, who came from Pleiades, and there are descriptions of him. Kritika is his name. And he was described as being from that star system. Now the Mayans, this great cycle that we just completed in December 21st, 2012, it turns out the 5,000 some odd year long cycle, the cycle of the Mayan calendar, the 5,000 year one, it turns out that our solar system just made one revolution around Alcyon, the central star of the Pleiades constellation. Now that's pretty amazing, considering that the Mayans in Guatemala, whose pyramids, which are made of semiconductive material, a calcium-based stone, built their pyramids in the ratio of the star system of the Pleiades, and they claim, the Mayan locals in Guatemala claim that the builders came from Pleiades. So now we're getting somewhere. I believe...
David, I have a question from the chat, but I'm going to let you finish what you're saying, and then I'll give it to you, and it's got to do with the Pleiades. But go ahead.
Okay. Well, see, what we're starting to see is a history of a connection between Earth and that star system, and the fact that our sun and our solar system revolves around it every 5,000, 300 and something years. I forget the exact number of years. You can Google it. It means that gravitationally we are ruled by Pleiades gravitationally. And if that fact is true, it took us a long time in astronomy to figure out that we were revolving around Pleiades because we don't have enough data. We didn't have enough data even 20 years ago to understand that that was actually happening. But now we see the Great Pyramid in 4121 BC, the ascending-descending passage at 26.3 degrees was pointing directly to it at solstice, and that same angle goes through the city of Bethlehem, but it was built thousands of years before. And you have the Star of Bethlehem, which, like I said, I believe was a vortex that opened up between Earth and that star system. And you have pyramids in Central America, which I believe are actual electronic crystal oscillators, and I built a whole case for that in my new film coming out on the Quantum Pyramid, and electronically how that actually works. that means that if you set up a vibration of the ratio of the harmonics of that star system, at the very least, a priest or priestess inside of that energy field of those oscillations will have an astral projection ability between Earth and that star system. But I actually believe it can physically move a person to and from through that stargate. Now, I started doing this with this small device in our house. So I'll take the question first, and we'll go into that.
Okay, but even before the question, I want to say I find it very interesting that these pyramids are found all over the planet Earth, and these ancient civilizations were supposed to have not had, the means of traveling in planes and cars and things like that. And what's even more is we're finding through pictures that they're even on other planets like Mars, the Moon, things like that. So very interesting, but we'll get into that. The question is, isn't there a warning in the Book of Job to not being influenced by the Pleiades? That's the question.
No, I've read the Book of Job, and there's nothing
Job.
Job that actually names the star system. That you start to get into really complicated stuff when you get into the Old Testament, the numerous books of the Old Testament, and which God is talking to which God, and it really gets complicated. So I'm not going to get into a religious debate, but Pleiades.
Right.
There are numerous stars that have 6 or 7 stars to them, including the Big Dipper, so it's not really clear which star system we're talking about in some of those old books.
Okay.
But, so what starts to happen in my house is I started 3 years ago transmitting questions to the Pleiades because as a kid growing up in Berkeley in the 1960s, in 1967 or 68, walking home from elementary school, I see the UFO, and it's down low. Everyone's seeing it. People are screaming and opening the neighbors' doors and telling everyone to come and see the flying saucer. And then it disappears in a blink of an eye, goes into another dimension, and in the following weeks, I'm having contact behind sleep where the Pleiadians are communicating with me and showing me how their craft work and who I am. And as a little boy at that age, it's way over my head, but I remember all of it. My whole life goes by, and I've never seen them again. I've never seen their flying saucers again. The Billy Meyer contacts in Switzerland started a few years after my Pleiadian contacts as a kid. Now, because his started, I think, in 72, and mine was 67 and 68. Now, I'm not competing against Billy Meyer. I'm just telling my story. He's got his story, and I have my story. What ends up happening is, with the theory that pyramids built in ratios of star systems as giant crystal oscillators, and me doing all this math on the ratio of Pleiades, and because NASA knows the radius of 5 of those stars, I'm able to duplicate all the frequencies. And I start transmitting. And the first time I transmitted was like 3 years ago, where I actually transmitted my wife singing a jazz song, a Frank Sinatra song called Fly Me to the Moon. Just for fun, we wanted to see what happened. And when I did it, in the middle of the night, a very clear, audible, very loving male voice just zapped me out of bed. I heard this voice saying, "Congratulations, we received your message," which was transmitted on my birthday of that year of August 21st, when Pleiades are rising above the edge of the mountains in Sedona, just around midnight, just after midnight. And he said, "Congratulations, we received your message. Now what do you want to ask us?" And this is not a voice like your brain talking to itself. This was an audible voice in the room. It was full 3-dimensional sound. And I just leaped out of bed and went, "Holy cow, it works. Now I got a million questions I want to ask you." So the next day I record all these questions to the Pleiadians. Where have you been? Why has it been my whole life since I've seen you? And I sent the transmission out on my birthday that year. And 2 nights later, the answer came back. Just mind-blowing stuff. Well, going forward, I had done that only about twice a year for a 2.5-year period. And when we were coming to the end of the Mayan calendar, on December 21st, 2012, my wife and I decided to transmit the Pleiadian harmonics in our room during meditation and sleep for 2 weeks in a row. And so I've never done this before. I'm doing it every single night, and every single time we did it, almost every night they appeared at the foot of our bed, these tall, glowing blue beings and yellow golden light beings appeared at the foot of our bed. And my wife, for the first time in her life, jumps out of bed the same second I did, woke up in the middle of the night. We both look up, and we're both looking at him at the same time. Then eventually what started to happen coming towards December 21st is I meet, in a very clear lucid dream, these two Pleiadian women who had dark hair, not blonde hair. And they told me about my childhood and how, this is really interesting, they told me that they lost contact with me for many years of my developing years because, and when I was about 12 years old, my mom was in her second marriage, and she suddenly had to get rid of us all and send us to live with our real father, who was a psychologist from Berkeley, but who had now moved to Vancouver, Canada, and it just devastated us emotionally. I mean, I cried for years over the loss of being near my mother. And they told me when my heart energy shut down, they couldn't see my signal anymore. And they couldn't actually find me. And I find that very interesting because in the HeartMath Institute, a subject that's in our film Quantum Communication, where physicists and meditators are collaborating on this vision of how we actually communicate through telepathy, and faster than light communication happens through consciousness. It turns out that the human heart has a far bigger energy field than the brain. And when the heart is damaged emotionally, it shuts down its magnetic field, and we lose our ability to telepath. In fact, quantum physicists had done experiments with a mother and a baby rabbit where they separate them over hundreds to even thousands of miles, and they wire the nervous system of the mother and the baby together. They wire them up, and they're looking at the impulses from the nerves, and they'll pinprick the baby, and the mother feels it faster than the speed of light instantly somewhere else on the planet because it registers in her nervous system. So you think of that, and you think of, okay, well, if you damage the heart and the bond between the mother and the baby, you lose the signal. The signal diminishes because it's actually your heart that is transmitting the faster than light signal, not the brain. So what happens is they're telling me that, we can see you develop this technology, we're able to communicate with you again, and they said, oh my God, you were supposed to be way more successful than you are. Your movie scripts that you wrote, none of them got made into movies, and they said you should have a way bigger lab, and you should be funded, and you should be doing way bigger things, because what they showed me is there is a fiber optic super light highway that connects the Pleiades star system to Earth and many other planets, and that they have been using this technology, harmonic technology, which is really quantum entanglement. But if you know the math of the vibration of your distant target, you don't need to actually go there first to quantum entangle. You're in faster than light communication, and they showed me these, like Pleiadian, totally human-looking, very much like us, but taller than us, that lots of them that were traveling this fiber optic superlight highway, and this girl from the Pleiades comes, and she's twirling, like singing in the sound of music, totally happy, completely liberated race of beings. They can go anywhere they want, unlike us, and they're just so free and so happy. They don't really have the stress and the worries that we have, being trapped on a planet and being oppressed by governments. They're free of all that. They can go anywhere they want, so there is no oppression in their freedom. And when I saw this girl twirling in the yard, she came out of a star of light, like a ball of light that was so pure. And I saw her out of body and just spinning and dancing in the yard, and she said, who are you? And how did you figure out, this technology? And they started to appear more and more and more of them, and they were telling me about my connection to that star system and how that are going to try to help me to get out of the house that we're living in and get into a better place where I can have a better research center. So guess what happens next? What happens next is they continue to appear almost every night. But then one night I'm making soup in the kitchen and I got the baby monitor on, because we have a two-year-old girl, and I'm watching my wife and baby on the baby monitor in the black and white, the infrared, and it just turns off. And I went, oh my God, I didn't know my wife got up and turned off the baby monitor. I go in the bedroom, and the monitor is not only off, but the switch is off. The physical switch, and neither my wife nor my baby got up and turned it off. And I went, oh my God, that's impossible. There's nobody in the house, except for what they're starting to tell me is they're now physically here. They're physically manipulating things in the house. Well, then, this is approaching December 21st, all of a sudden my daughter's playing in her playroom and the water heater catches on fire and starts smoking, which is actually quite toxic. We rush the baby out of the house, and we have to turn off all the breakers, and it turns out that the water heater malfunctioned and was boiling over, and these things can actually explode like a bomb and go off in your house, and I could have lost my daughter. And that was really scary. We really thought, we got to get out of this house. The Pleiadians told us they don't want us living here anymore. There's a better place for us to live. And so then the water lines in the ceiling burst just outside the front door, and there are hundreds of gallons of water pouring all over the property and into the front door. And we call the plumber, and it turns out that, the lines were not insulated good enough, and they had to bring in these blowers. And these blowers were really high-powered blowers, and they were running like 15 amps on a 20-amp circuit for 2 days. And then suddenly there's a fire, huge fire, that has erupted in the laundry room on the other side of my lab. And I went, we got the baby out of the house. There's smoke and flames everywhere. And it's like,
so
oh my God, I can't
one
believe
way or another.
they're going to get us out of there one way or another. And then what happens is I get the hose, and I just bought a brand new hose, thank God, and I start putting out the fire. The fire department comes, and they put out the rest of the fire, and clearly, in my opinion, the lamp cord just lit up like a toaster oven and melted down and started the fire. And there was some, different types of fuel sitting there nearby, which that further escalated the fire. But nevertheless, I was able to save my lab, and the landlord wouldn't let us out of our lease and said the house is safe to live in. And I said, what do you mean? We've got floods. We've got, actually, before even the electrical fire, we had all these outlets in the house starting to go bad, and lights were turning on and turning off, and pretty soon all the Christmas lights stopped working in the yard, and the circuit was blown. So it was getting really paranormal. Well, we got out, and within 3 days there was a new house with a huge air-conditioned controlled garage, way cheaper rent, way bigger place, and way better place to work, exactly what they told me they wanted me to do.
That's incredible.
That's incredibly paranormal. I mean, all of that happened within weeks, coming up to the 21st of December and right after.
Okay, so David, we got a call, and I want to take your call in just a minute, but question from the chat. Adana asked if you have any implants. I mean, are these beings anything like the Greys that we hear about?
No, they're the Pleiadians are about 8 feet tall. Some of them, they're human. They look just like us. They are highly, highly evolved. Their stars are younger than ours. Our sun is actually incredibly old compared to theirs. Theirs are about 700-800 million years old. Ours is about 4.5 billion years old. They don't need implants to communicate. They're able to do it directly through consciousness. I had one experience the years that I was living in the giant tent on my father's land, where the Greys, but they were very skinny Greys, had me strapped to a table, And after I had met Christ, they said they wanted to erase my memory because they didn't want me teaching any of the things that he taught me to teach others. And they were going to erase my memory and give me amnesia. And as they approached me with the syringe, I flipped backwards out of my astral body. And this was before the movie The Matrix came out. And I started doing kung fu at lightning speed, and it scared the crap out of them, and they left, and they never, ever messed with me again. Another time, there was an Anunnaki, the giant bird-like humanoids that are seen in ancient texts, and he was sent to destroy me on the astral plane. He looked at me, and I knew he was going to destroy me, and I sent a mind bomb. I set off a mind bomb, which was like a bubble that just shattered him into a million little pieces. And he started to reassemble himself, and because he was still conscious, even though he was made of tiny little pieces of dirt. But as he started to assemble himself, he was scared to death of me. He wouldn't come anywhere near me. Another time, this is just one more quick story. The Greys, there was a dream I had one of the first times I was in Sedona, and it was a white van in the dream, and a man got out with coveralls, and I looked in his eyes, and I said, "You're not human." And he turned into a Zeta Reticuli Grey, and he looked at me, and I threw him with my consciousness, and he crashed into all these garbage cans. But then he looked at me, and he trapped me in the hive, which is the collective consciousness of the Greys. And it was so cold and so void of any feelings of love, but I could feel their motherships. I could feel everything the Greys were up to for about an hour, but I was getting colder and colder and colder. I was doing Hail Marys and prayers and trying to get out of this hive, and nothing worked until I visualized. 2 hours later, I thought of the color pink, and they couldn't stand it. They just went flying away from me. And I got out of the hive.
Too pretty for them. Yeah, the more I hear about these Greys, the more I don't like them. I used to say, well, there could be good Greys and bad Greys. I don't know. I think it's more along the lines of good aliens, bad Greys.
Yeah, the Greys. There are some good Greys, just like any race, but there's a lot of things that happened in that star system of Zeta Reticuli that didn't evolve emotionally. They didn't know how to connect in the heart center, which is why they don't like pink, because pink is a heart vibrational frequency of energy. And they're very good at technology. They have a collective mind, but it's not the same as the oneness of the light. It is a singular mind, so it's like a beehive. Once you're in their consciousness, they all feel what everyone else is thinking. So there's no way to do anything outside of the collective. But there's no love there. It's just void. It's really, really terrifying state of consciousness. But I eventually got out of it. It took 2 hours, and my physical body was getting cold. My wife was on top of me trying to warm me up, and nothing was working until I thought of the color pink. So that's a good secret to give out to everybody.
All right, great. Let's get a call in here. We've got Rascala in Florida. Rascala, welcome aboard, my friend.
Hello, Michael.
Hi.
Hello, David.
Hello.
Interesting at the very least. To say interesting at the very least. David, can I ask you some questions?
Sure.
Well, let's go with the pyramids first. Let's talk about the pyramids for a second. I want to confirm what you said about the pyramids. The pyramids, I believe, did resonate. Pyramids did several things. They produced electricity, and that they did resonate. They produced I don't know what the frequency was, but they produced a resonance that surrounded the entire area, keep everybody in a euphoric state. All the people that lived near the pyramids lived in a euphoric state, which came from the pyramids. Now, the information I'm giving you is through my research from a Dr. Zahi Hawass. Dr. Hawass was Supreme Council of Antiquities in Egypt. His whole life he spent studying the pyramids as well as the generation before him. It was a handed down kind of thing. So I'd like to confirm that. You're right about the pyramids do resonate. To this day they resonate. Oh, excuse me. To this day they resonate. They just because they're so corroded, they don't resonate the proper frequency. So people don't really they can't pick up on it. I happen to be born in Cairo, and when I was about 4.5 or 5 years old, I remember my dad taking me to see the Great Pyramid of Giza, and at that age, and I am considerably older now, at that age I touched the pyramid and I could feel there was a distinct power coming from the pyramids. Kind of, sort of like electricity, but not like electricity. The feeling of like when your leg goes to sleep, you know what I'm saying? And
right.
But had almost felt good in a way, kind of a weird way. Almost felt good. But anyway, I wanted to share that with you. The other thing was earlier on when you had mentioned you had seen Christ, or you had seen a bunch of white balls, and was a bunch of balls?
They're like little atoms, about the size of tiny little atoms of like diamond-like light. They were like atoms that collected from all over the universe to form his body.
And were you able to communicate?
Oh, yeah.
And the information that he passed on to you, was any of that information some of the message that he was telling the people at the time while he was here?
Oh, no, I wrote a book about it. It was stolen. My publisher stole it and never, he made me give him $15,000 to publish it, and it's on Amazon. It's called Face to Face with Jesus Christ, but I've never even got my cost back. He just stole it from me, and it's been selling for over 10 years, since the year 2000. So I documented a total of 3 meetings I had with him, and he has been teaching me quantum physics and, a lot of what I've discovered in the pyramid. I mean, I know the exact electromagnetic frequencies of the pyramid, and the numbers are so shocking and so mind-blowing. It mathematically proves they were built by a civilization that knew the speed of light and faster than light frequency energies. There's no question when you look at the math. I mean, I'm the first one to do the actual math on it as a crystal oscillator, not a resonant frequency. And they need a power source to get the oscillations in the semiconductor material to start spinning. The electrons spin in a semiconductor at less than the speed of light, but the signal they give off right at the surface is the speed of light and actually beyond. And when you take the perimeter, I'm going to give out a number right now, and this number is so unbelievably profound. The slope angle of the Great Pyramid, when it had the limestone casings on it, according to Le Mesurier, is 51 degrees, 51 minutes, and 143 seconds. So it's very precise, the 5151. I was the first person to take the Ark of the Covenant and use the most common measurement in the pyramid to determine what a true cubit is, to determine the true length of the Ark of the Covenant, the device that Moses was told to build by his God. Well, the most common measurement in the pyramid is the 2 royal cubits equals 21.41 primitive inches. So you take 21.41 primitive inches divided by 2, because that's 2 royal cubits, and you get, it's 41.21. 41.21 divided by 2 gives you the true Egyptian inches of an actual cubit, which is 20.605. And you multiply that by 2.5 cubits as the length of the ark, and you get 51.51, which is the same slope angle on the Great Pyramid. Why that number? And I'll tell you why that number. When you get to the base capstone on the pyramid, it's 572.2 primitive inches. The primitive inch is almost identical to our inch. It's 0.00106 different, so it's hardly even any different. And what you do with a In electricity you have sine waves, which are circular waves, and you have square waves, and you have sawtooth. So the pyramid is a square wave oscillator. So you take 572.2 primitive inches times the 1.00106 difference, which is really nothing. And you convert the number of primitive inches in the speed of light, and you divide the perimeter of 1800.249100057 primitive inch perimeter of the square capstone into the speed of light to get the frequency, the electromagnetic frequency at the surface of the crystal, not the electron frequency, the electromagnetic frequency. And the frequency comes to 5.151 megahertz. 5151. You have to know the speed of light to have built those dimensions into the pyramid, which is proof it wasn't built by a primitive race. They didn't know the speed of light perfectly until 1972. Even in Einstein's time, they had not quantified it that perfectly. And I did this in converting the speed of light into primitive inches, and I got 5151 megahertz. Oh my God. That's the master. That's the same number in the length in primitive inches, Egyptian inches, in the Ark of the Covenant, which ties the Ark of the Covenant to the pyramid, which means Moses, his God, whoever he was communicating to, had the same frequency that he transmitted to his God as in the frequency of the capstone base. And then I did the math on all the different dimensions of the pyramid and got all the frequencies and started transmitting them into my room. And I can't even tell you who I met. I can't. It's like you can't even believe what starts to happen.
Well, Roscola was curious about the Christ meetings, I believe, and what happened there with those.
Who was curious about that?
Our caller, Roscola.
Well, the first thing is to understand that the pyramid has the slope angle that connects the Pleiades, the 26.3 degree ascending-descending passage connects Pleiades at summer solstice in 2141 BC, which is an inverse of the 4121 Egyptian inches, the most common measurement anywhere inside the pyramid, which is proof that is the pyramid. The pyramid is a Palladian transmitter. And the 5151 gets more mystical than even that. So remember, we have the 26.3 degree ascending-descending passage connects with Alcyon, the central Palladian sun, in the year 4121 BC at summer solstice. And if you flip that angle onto the ground, which follows the Bethlehem angle shadow at summer solstice today, which goes through Bethlehem, that connects Christ to the Pleiades. I believe the Star of Bethlehem was a stargate that opened up between Egypt and the Holy Land where he was born, because the stargate opened to bring his soul into this planet from that stargate system. And so now we know, well, who built the pyramid? Who knew that Jesus was going to be born thousands of years later, and that the pyramid predicted it? And why is this 5151 number the same number of not only, it's going to get more mystical here, the 5151, and this is the first time I'm going to say this anywhere on the air, anywhere in the world, but I hope this is archived.
Oh, it is.
Well, you go to all the crop circles in England. Go to Google Earth. Open your Google Earth up and go to Rosslyn Chapel in England and look at the longitude, latitude. It's sitting at 55 degrees 51 minutes north longitude. There it is, the same number. Stonehenge is sitting at 51 degrees. Then there's this famous, Colin Andrews and I have been going over this on the phone recently, there's this famous broadcast where this extraterrestrial named Commander, he's part of the Ashtar Command, which is part of the command of the Second Coming of Christ, according to this group of extraterrestrials. He hijacks a radio station in England, and you can Google this. You know, this is when this commander hijacks a television station, interrupts the broadcast, which you technologically cannot do unless you have a transmitter physically sitting right on top of that TV transmitter that is at least 10 times more powerful than the transmission power, and no such device ever appeared. And this transmission occurred at 5:10 p.m. in 1977 in England, 5:1. And the transmitter location is sitting at 51 degrees 1 minute north. The same number, the 5151. It's in the pyramid. It's in the Ark of the Covenant. It's the frequency of the capstone, the slope angle of the pyramid. Rosslyn Chapel sitting at 55 degrees 51 minutes. Stonehenge sitting at 51 degrees. This transmitter tower at 5:10 p.m., 5:1, sitting at 5:1 degrees. You're going to start to understand what's going on here. Is this communication with ET all has to do with a harmonic signature that allows a dimensional portal to open up using harmonic that are consistently showing up all over the planet. I mean, what I just gave you on the show, what I just told your audience is never been discovered before by any other researcher anywhere. The 5151 is everywhere in these ancient sites, which proves whoever built them were not primitive stone builders. They were using stone as crystal oscillating material in precise dimensions. And I know way more than I'm telling you, way more about Christ and the pyramids, way more about the connection in England and all the crop circles appearing within minutes of the 51-degree angle. All of the crop circles, all within 51 degrees and so many minutes. They're all there. That's the portal. That's the opening at that exact number. So what we're doing now, Michael, is I'm making available, people can buy these wands from lightstreamtechnologies.com, and it comes with not only the 5151 master number to open up your own intercommunication pyramid, Stargate, if you will, but it comes with the frequencies of different star systems, the frequencies of our planet and the frequencies of our sun, so that you can start experimenting with your astral and spiritual self with these harmonics to find out for yourself, like many of my users are, that you can open up a direct portal for yourself and have these experiences. And the 5151 is, I believe, a frequency that was used by the ancient Egyptians and Moses' Ark of the Covenant to communicate with his God for a very specific reason. And that reason will be unveiled in my new film, The Quantum Pyramid, coming out hopefully in the next year.
Okay. Now, do these wands, do they plug in, or they got batteries?
Yeah, they plug in. There's an amplifier they connect to, which all of the frequency and harmonic frequencies go into your iTunes or your iPad device, which connects to an amplifier, which connects to the transmitter. And that allows you, and this transmitter has a huge field, but there are no microwaves in it. So we go back to the movie Resonance Beings of Frequency. It's not electromagnetic fields that are harmful. We're surrounded by them all the time. They're in nature, they're in the sun. It's the microwave spectrum in particular where we transmit radio, television, and cell phone information that is causing all of the harm. So I don't have any microwaves in my transmitter. There's no high-frequency radio or microwave. And
with this frequency, people would be able to actually open up communications with these other races?
Well, see, I can't legally state that. I can only say that science, if you see the movie Resonance Beings of Frequency, there's very solid proof that our DNA is reading frequencies all the time. Fritz Albert Popp says our DNA transmits faster than light signals, this physicist in Germany. If you put the frequencies of a star system, it will send, theoretically, a copy of your astral body to that star system or open up a gateway between you and that star system. Whether you're conscious enough as a conscious being to actually perceive it, that depends on the individual. So what I tell people is if you use this device, at the very least, you'll start resonating. We have Pleiades, we have Vega, we have Alpha Centauri, we have our solar system and sun. We have many star systems that I've mathematically calculated the frequencies for people to work with. I believe the pyramids in many cultures were resonant crystal oscillators that allowed the priest and priestesses to have a direct line of communication with that star group. So you see pyramids built in ratios of different star systems. There are many star systems I'm still working on now, but I have about 10 of them open. I've only personally had the best luck with Pleiades and Sirius AB. I've had direct meetings with Isis and Osiris through using those. They're very close.
I'd be interested in just communicating with the life on the planets in our solar system, because I think there is some within.
Well, yeah, Pythagoras, the great mathematician Pythagoras, said all of the planets in our solar system are inhabited by spiritual beings, non-physical, so non-threatening. And so therefore, if you can harmonize your meditative self with that planet, you can have an experience. I had experiences faster using the frequencies of our own planets than the distant star systems. Some of the distant star systems would take me a month of really resonating with that star system. But
what about physical?
What's that?
I say, what about physical life, like say on Mars or even Venus? I mean, they tell us that temperatures are this and temperatures are that, but how do we really know they're being totally honest with us?
Well, so like I said about temperature, it all has to do with the vibratory rate of the cell and how much crystal and semiconductor material you have in an organism to withstand different temperatures. And they don't, heat is resistance. It's a resistance phenomena. So if you don't have a lot of resistance, in fact, there's a guy on YouTube where he gets struck by lightning and he also sticks his fingers in electrical outlets and he doesn't get electrocuted because there's no resistance in his circuit. So physically, miracles of saints walking through burning furnaces and fires, which is documented in the Catholic Church, can be explained like that, where when you go into a higher frequency state physically, you don't get burned by these higher temperatures, and so therefore there could be people living on Venus and Mars, absolutely, Mercury, but they don't appear physical to us because, and I'll give you an example. Last night I was using my wand transmitting the pyramid frequencies and I was just falling asleep, and all of a sudden I see this woman who's pulsing at such a high frequency. She flashes like Superwoman through the wall and touches the wand on the side of my bed. And she looks at me, and then, boom, she flashes out. And I looked at the vibratory rate of her body and went, oh, my God, she might have been really physical, not just a spiritual being coming through the wall. She had a vibratory rate that just literally pulsed through my whole nervous system. And she was glowing with light and like an angel, but she didn't have wings. She was just a person, blonde hair and I mean, I thought, God, look at the vibratory rate of that woman's energy field. Holy cow! No wonder they can go through walls. They can travel super fast. So we have examples in the Catholic Church and Buddhism and in India of saints that have been physically able to transform their bodies into balls of light and go shooting off into space. Now, in the Western world, in our civilization, we call that paranormal or paranormal phenomena that we think is fringe science or nobody really understands it, because we don't have a lot of deep meditators in the Western world because, we have to work so much to pay so much money just to stay alive, whereas in countries, other countries, we're not. There are certain individuals. It's pretty rare even in India and Africa where you have people who apply themselves to these processes of meditation, like I've been
guys,
doing.
we're up for another break here. So, okay, now you're back with Schola.
Thank you, David.
Yeah,
you gave me a tremendous answer, but you didn't answer the question though. When you had your meeting with Christ, what was the message that you got?
Well, that wasn't one little message. I mean, it's enormous what he told me. I mean, first, it's almost impossible to survive a direct gaze upon his face. He is so immensely powerful. There's so much holiness and light and ecstasy and love coming from him that mortals can't survive looking at that much love. It's too intense. So you naturally are humbled to look at his feet, and it's really difficult to look at his feet because of the power and the glory that comes from them. I had no doubt that when I looked at him, I was looking at the greatest being in the known universe. I mean, I'm just a little human, so what do I know? But all I can say is I've never seen any being more beautiful and more loving and more powerful. But I only was able to look at his face for a second at a time in my first meeting with him. And my second meeting was Easter morning in 1997, and I actually stood up and looked directly into him, and he was just pulsing like a supernova, just blasting out light at a level that is unimaginable, and was teaching me about heaven, what happens when you die, how judgment really works. For example, he said the way judgment works is not the way you would think it would work. He said it doesn't really matter what you did in your life. The question is, can you withstand the love that exists in heaven? And heaven is our higher levels of planetary and interstellar domains. So there are higher and higher heavens, higher and higher levels of the light. And he told me there are millions of paradise planets just in the first heaven. He said what happens is when you die, it doesn't matter what you believed. What matters is the truth of who God really is the love itself, not a name, not a personality. It's not like a bouncer who lets you in a club and doesn't let you out. He said some people did everything right in their life, but the love is too intense for them, and they judge themselves or reject themselves out of heaven, and they go reincarnate in another planet, another realm, maybe Earth again, until they get it, until they're able to receive that much love. So the judgment is not God judging you. It's you measuring yourself against the truth that the light of God is. And if you measure up, if you can stand it, you stay in heaven. If there are people who last days, weeks, minutes, seconds, and they leave because they can't handle it. It's too open for them. So he told me there were people who did everything right by the book, but they're just too uptight, and Jesus is full of love. He's full of bliss and ecstasy. And he actually showed me there are people who can't stand the joy in heaven. It's too difficult because they're too attached to suffering. They actually become addicted to misery. So the forgiveness of sin is a state of ignorance where you're not in a state of absolute love for everyone and all things. And therefore, if you can't let go of your pain and your resentment, you can't actually bliss out and live in heaven because there is no suffering there at all. So the universe divides itself based on your frequency, based on your vibration. It doesn't judge you, in a sense, the way a courtroom judge would work.
So would heaven be another dimension? Is that what that is? The highest dimension?
Yeah, there
maybe?
are higher dimensions of heaven right on earth. There are things in the Gospels, like the Gospel of Thomas, where Jesus is saying that there is heaven right in front of you, but you can't actually see it. It's right here, like a rolled-up carpet, I think he said in the Gospel of Thomas, but you just can't recognize it. So you can experience it right here and right now in deep prayer and meditation. But for the most part, it's invisible to most of us. So the process of having your sins forgiven, he told me, is a letting go of all of your junk, all of your pain. This person did this to me. This person did that to me. That's why I'm miserable. He wants you to let it all go. So the process of forgiving is you forgiving yourself and God forgiving you at the same time. But our birthright is actually the bliss and the ecstasy and the love. It's actually our birthright. But we get so caught up in wanting to get revenge for people who hurt us that this vicious cycle keeps repeating, and it doesn't allow us to let go and to go into heaven's light. So that's what he said happens at the moment of death. For every soul, And it's true that if you follow the gospel, you follow the teachings in any religion, really, that are good religions, that you will measure up, that you'll be able to live in that much love, because you'll have had a good, you will have been a loving parent to your children, you will have been a loving person in your community, so you're familiar with the love vibration. Although God's love doesn't rise and fall. It doesn't fill you and empty you. It's permanent. And it's not irritating like kind of a hyperactive ecstasy. It's a very smooth, peaceful ecstasy. There are numerous qualities in the light. There are the highest qualities, which are beyond ecstasy you experience in the higher heavens, are graces, and the graces make ecstasy look boring. They are so unbelievable just to experience those qualities if you were to separate them out. The love and the ecstasy are actually in the lower heavens. The higher heavens are pure cosmic bliss and graces that are just, there's no way to describe them. There's no literature to describe what it's like there. But he took me through, I went through 6 of probably what are documented as 9 levels of heaven that humans have eventually reached. There are higher heavens that Dante describes in the Divine Comedy beyond the 9th, but there's no humans that have ever gone there. But so we have enormous potential. We have our true potential is we're like cocoons. We're like we're trying to become butterflies. We're trying to become spiritual beings of light, but we're stuck in these bodies that suffer, and we really have a lot of resentment towards the fact that we suffer, but suffering ultimately is designed to bring us into a state of compassion, a non-selfish state where we become absorbed in other people's well-being rather than just our own. But, so there are people who do things wrong in life, and they make the wrong choices for themselves. They don't choose loving relationships. They choose relationships for other symbols like power, wealth, money, beauty. I mean, it's not that you can't have those things in your life, but it's just that shouldn't be your motivation. Your motivation should be that you really are choosing a person that you really love. And if you get a lot of love in your life, it's going to be easy to get into heaven because you're so familiar with it. But if you suffer too much and you're resentful of your suffering, you can get pretty messed up, and it can be pretty hard to get in because you won't forgive yourself the suffering. God doesn't judge anybody. It's you judging yourself, and you, with God, trying to let go of all of your suffering so you can get ready to receive this bliss and this ecstasy and this peace.
See, that's how I always thought of it. I felt like, if you can't forgive yourself, how can you expect God to forgive you?
Exactly. You have to be the one to let it go, ultimately. And you even have to forgive yourself the things that you did yourself that you know were not really supporting you, but you just somehow did them. And that way, if you're able to, he showed me, he called them the terrible ironies. He said, there are people who did everything wrong, but they somehow were able to let go and absorb themselves in the love and the light, and they were so happy to be in the love and the light, it doesn't matter what they did in their life. And then he said there's people who did everything right, but they were so anal retentive and uptight, and they criticized other people for not doing things right, but they themselves couldn't let go and absorb heaven's life and just let that whole thing about being perfect go. Because you don't have to try to be perfect in heaven. The bliss and the ecstasy and the peace is so perfect in itself, it supports you. It doesn't ever let you get depressed. It's naturally evolving.
Our leaders do that. They set rules and boundaries, and that's for us. And then they go ahead and, while they'll throw us in prison for something, our president will sit at the desk and do lines of cocaine or whatever else they do. So yeah, it's like a big learning experience here on this planet, this life. I think that we're here to learn some kind of lesson. And, when it comes down to it, I don't know if what's going to happen to a lot of the souls that are here now, because it doesn't seem like they're learning that lesson. It's we've got
tragically, Jesus and the angels told me that tragically, you're exactly right. A lot of them, when they die, they can go into the light for a little while, but they don't last very long because they didn't live their life in a way that is a natural flow to be able to make the quantum leap. Because God's love is, like if I compare the love I have for my daughter and my wife, which is the greatest thing I've ever experienced, compared to standing in front of Christ, well, His love blows. It's more difficult to stand in Jesus' presence personally than it is to be in the first, second, third, or fourth heaven. When you get to the higher heavens, it's more like being directly in His personal presence. But the levels of ecstasy multiply another 1,000,000 times every time you go higher. So you got to be able to withstand more of it permanently. And I felt comfortable in the third heaven that I could live in that state all day long. But the higher ones, I was telling God, stop, this is too much for me. I had no idea there was this much love and ecstasy and the graces and there's unnameable qualities in the higher heavens. I like to visit those, but then retreat back to a level where I'm comfortable, right? But it's great to know that you'll never get bored because there's always a higher place to go. You're never going to get bored. But it is sad what we're doing on this planet, what we're doing to each other, the environment, with science, the oppression of governments and bankers, has made it harder for the common person to just have a happy life. I mean,
yeah, it's like we're in the woods, and a bad winter storm has come through, and we've got a fire, and we're all taking a leak on it.
Yeah, we're not even together anymore. People, it's every man for himself. Nobody, I remember in the 60s, I'm Canadian, but we moved to Berkeley in 1964, so I grew up in California as a kid mostly. And I remember houses were $20,000, and, my stepfather worked as a photo clerk at Thrifty's drugstore when he was going to school to learn how to be a science teacher, and he had raised 4 boys. Like, you can't do that anymore. You can't even, you got to have freaking 5 jobs to raise 4 boys, which means you don't have time as a father to be with your kids. And why are kids getting so messed up now? Because their parents can't, they got to work too hard to pay for a fictitious number called a mortgage, and rent that is astronomical just to exist.
That is all the evil plan of the New World Order. Break up the family. And,
but see, this is the trick. Even though it's truly evil and anti-life, it's true that we've made it